One of the problems with exotic pet ownership is that people are, fortunately or unfortunately, very used to dogs and cats. And so you hit the tens and you start to be thinking, okay, we're getting a little bit up there in age. And that is just not the case for a lot of these exotic species. So that's a paradigm shift for people. I see far too many of these animals that are abandoned into the wild, unfortunately, or abandoned at a shelter. And now what do we do with that animal, right? It comes to us or it comes to animal control. It now is a situation where either we rehome it quite rapidly or we have to think about a humane euthanasia situation.
Welcome to the Pause and Effect podcast, where we bring you expert advice to help you make informed decisions about your pets. I'm your host, Dr Carra, a veterinarian committed to providing credible information that empowers pet owners. Today, we are exploring the fascinating world of exotic pets and discussing which ones may be the best fit for families. I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Christian, a veterinarian with vast experience in zoological medicine and a deep understanding of exotic pet care. We'll be talking about everything from the unique benefits of owning exotic pets to the potential risks and responsibilities involved. If you've ever considered adding an exotic pet to your family, or you're just curious about the care they require, this episode is filled with expert insights that you won't want to miss. So a very warm welcome to Dr. Christian, all the way from Florida. Welcome to the Pause and Effect podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. This will be a lot of fun. I'm really excited to chat about some exotic pet ownership today.
I'm very, very delighted to have you here. So normally my conversation is around cats and dogs. We've tapped into a bit of snakes, but we don't have a lot of information to hand about our exotic pets. And we are fortunate that we have very good colleagues at a nearby practice who do some exotic work, but we are open 24 hours, and often we're faced with some of these exotic pets that we are now sort of being forced to kind of get familiar with. So I think, the work that you're doing, you're all the way from Florida. Just introduce what you do and how you got into zoological veterinary medicine. It's fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, so I am one of the zoological medicine residents at the University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. I'm the first year, so I'm just starting out my 3-year residency here. And basically what I do is I see all client-owned and zoological institution-owned exotic animals, basically anything non-domestic in the zoological medicine department. So we don't see any dogs, cats, horses, cattle, goats, sheep, pigs, but we see all of their wild counterparts and are able to translate what we know about our domestic species to the wild and non-domestic species that we treat. And it's a 3-year training program where I have mentors who are boarded zoological veterinarians. I learn from them. I'm able to get some publication experience, so some research and writing, get clinical experience as well as teaching experience for the students that rotate through our service at University of Florida. And the goal is that at the end of the 3-year residency, I am qualified enough to sit for our board exam and become a board certified specialist in zoological medicine.
Wow, very impressive. And so, very different, like you say, from cats and dogs, but we don't obviously go through vet school having the opportunity or even time to get familiar with all these species. How do you adjust to having to take on such a broad range of species?
It can certainly be overwhelming at times, right? I mean, you think about it, and our specialty is kind of like we are specialists at being the ultimate generalists because we have to know a little bit about every other species. And so it's really nice that nowadays in a lot of veterinary universities and colleges, they are kind of realizing that folks really enjoy exotic pet ownership, and they're starting to push that as a little bit more of the mainstream curriculum. And so students nowadays are getting a little bit more in the way of exotic animal medicine, but it's still not much comparatively. And even when you think about our general board exams for licensure for veterinary medicine, I mean, when I took boards, maybe there were 3 or 4 questions out of the 300 or 400 question exam that had to deal with exotics. So certainly there is still, a deficiency in the amount that exotic animal medicine is talked about, but that's the magic of having consulting services and having universities with specialty services like ours that even grad graduates that are coming out of the programs that may not feel super comfortable in exotic pet medicine, they have these avenues where they can reach out at any point in time and chat with us and get some more information and hopefully feel a little bit more comfortable. And we certainly try our best to provide as much CE as we can to all of our veterinary partners as well, so that it doesn't seem like you're out on an island and you shouldn't be seeing these pets, because I really think it is an enriching part of practice, and it's really great for our clients to have those resources and veterinarians willing to see these pets out in practice in a non-university setting.
Absolutely. And it's improving the quality of life of all these pets, which, it's ultimately our aim. So we were talking
Absolutely.
before about some of the interesting cases that you see. Please share with us, because I'd love our listeners to hear about the ostrich. So
Yeah, for
tell us
sure.
about that.
I would love to. Yeah, so it's, zoo medicine is wild, right? We go from seeing, smaller pocket pets potentially or zoological companion animal species like rabbits and guinea pigs in the morning to seeing a giraffe calf right before lunch that might be having diarrhea, or a crocodile that needs surgery for a foreign body after lunch. So it definitely keeps us on our toes. There is never a dull moment, and I truly most of the time never know what's going to walk in the door. So it's a lot of fun for me, and I think that's one of the most enriching parts of my job is the variety and the diversity of species and cases that we see. But one of my favorite ones most recently was an ostrich that we had that had ingested a little bit of metal. So ostrich are, a very pretty species. They are super fun to work with, but they're not the most intelligent at times, and they get distracted by shiny objects. And anything shiny looks really appetizing to them. So this ostrich unfortunately had eaten a bit of metal, and we had to anesthetize her, get her some diagnostics. So we did some radiographs, ultrasound, blood work, and ultimately had to take her to surgery. So a proventriculotomy, so going into one of their two stomachs to remove all of that foreign material. And it had a really great outcome. And this was just a really sweet animal and a really sweet owner. So that was one of my favorite recent cases that we
It's
had.
fascinating. I love the footage that you put up on your social media. It's just,
Oh,
like you
yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah.
every day is different. But I mean, it's just, oh, what a privilege it must be to just come up
Sure
close and
is.
personal with these beautiful creatures. So
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just
and I
in
still
awe.
have I still have pinch me moments,
I'm
right? Like
sure.
there you still got to do the job, right? And I'm
Yeah,
I'm sure we all have those moments where you're like, okay, this is my job, I need to do the things, but then you turn around at the tail end of the case and you look back on what you just did and you're like, dang,
crazy.
that was really cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, amazing. So I thought we need to take the opportunity to tap
Mhm.
into your advice, if you don't mind, about
Sure.
taking on exotic pets as sort
Mhm.
of an alternative to our cats and dogs. So, people are downscaling.
Mhm.
Perhaps they have a son like I do, or a daughter. Let's not exclude the girls, who
Mhm.
say, I really want a snake, or I want fish, or they go to the pet store and they eye up something interesting, and they're trying to convince their parents
Mhm.
to allow them to keep an exotic pet. So,
Yes.
from your experience, what do you feel are acceptable exotic pets to take on, and possibly not? And
Mhm.
what would we'll go into the discussion or the pros and cons, perhaps, of keeping these as you go through them.
Certainly. Yeah, I think that's probably the most important thing when you're going to seek out an exotic pet is trying to figure out what your goals are for that pet, and not only for the pet, but for your family, right? So like what as a family unit do you want from that pet? Are you seeking an animal that is going to be really energetic, interactive, licking your face, those sort of things? In that case, maybe getting a lizard may not provide that, fill that cup that you're looking for, and you may want to stick with a dog. But if you're looking for potentially a lower maintenance pet that, you need to teach your son or daughter the basics of animal husbandry, feeding, providing water, giving the proper lighting and environment, then certainly some of our reptile species can be really great avenues, or small mammals can be really great avenues to do that. But in that same vein, there are some that are really great for beginner exotic pet owners, and there are some species that I would recommend for more advanced hobbyists and folks that maybe have been doing this for a little bit of a longer period of time. And even some of those advanced hobbyists, there are some species that really just do not thrive well in a managed care environment, particularly in the home setting. So there are some species that I absolutely would not recommend as pets and would reserve those species for zoological institutions where they have the resources to care for them, or wildlife rehabilitation settings. So definitely look for, what am I wanting from this pet? What are my resources that I have available realistically within my environment at home to provide for that animal? And then just thinking about, the financial aspect of owning these pets too. It is not a cheap endeavor a lot of the time. And so we have to remember that pets are oftentimes wants. They are not needs, right? So if you do not have the means to fund that pet, then maybe seeking out another pet or waiting for an opportunity to have the funds in order to provide adequately for that animal is going to be the most important thing.
That is great advice, and I totally agree. And I want to sort of set the scene here a little bit, because I'd like us to go into your top pets that you would advise. But before I do so, I would like to share with my listeners my experience. And obviously, again, you say you've got to look at your resources, you've got to look at your experience, your capabilities. And so I have a son who's particularly interested in axolotls. And I'm going to cut a story quite short and say I now have 2 axolotls at home. I have, and I stress the word
Yep,
I.
you do.
I do. And so one of the things I really want to stress to parents considering taking on any pets that we're going to discuss in this podcast is that often you end up caring for them as much as you are trying to get your kids to get involved. The responsibility lies with you, and that includes learning everything about, and fortunately, obviously, as a vet, I had resources and capabilities that maybe other people don't at hand, but things like keeping axolotls when it gets to 32 degrees outside, and they need to remain at a far lower temperature. Those are the kind of things that practically, start to really can impact your life, particularly if you want to be able to go away for the weekend and they need daily feeding. So there are, like you say, there are lots of considerations, and it was a nice to have, but as we know with children, they also can lose interest quite quickly. Well,
and you have to remember too, these are long-term commitments for a lot of these species, right? This is not like a set it and forget it sort of thing. And, a lot of times people, and this is particularly popular in the US, I don't know how it is in South Africa, but, they'll get rabbits or other small rodents, particularly around Easter time, because it's really cute for you to have a rabbit that comes home in the Easter basket for your kids to see. And that is not really an appropriate reason to get a rabbit. These are not animals that you can just take care of for a weekend and then send back. These are commitments, particularly with some of our larger birds, with some of our reptiles. Some of those reptiles might outlive you, so you have to have contingency plans in your life for what we're going to do with that animal afterwards as well. So all definitely things to consider.
Hello, I'm Dr. Carra, a veterinarian and the host of the Pause and Effect podcast. Our show is all about enhancing the lives of pets by providing reliable, science-based advice and engaging in discussions with experts in veterinary medicine, pet nutrition, and animal behavior. As a professional with years of experience in both the UK and South Africa, I run a 24-hour veterinary hospital and an online pet store. I'm also pursuing a master's in animal nutrition and consult for UltraPet, a local veterinary-grade pet food manufacturer. My passion lies in sharing knowledge and helping pet owners make informed decisions about their pet companions. The Pause and Effect podcast is rapidly growing, attracting a dedicated and engaging audience of pet owners who are passionate about their pets' health and well-being. Our listeners trust us for credible, informative content that empowers them to provide the best care for their animals. We are looking for sponsors who share our commitment to pet health and who want to reach a highly engaged and expanding audience. Partnering with us means aligning your brand with trusted and influential content that resonates deeply with pet owners. As a sponsor, you'll benefit from high visibility on a platform that is used for multiple purposes, including educational content, product recommendations, and community building. We offer various sponsorship packages designed to fit your marketing goals and budget, ensuring that your brand gets the reach and the impact it deserves. Join us in making a difference in the lives of pets and their families. Let's work together to bring valuable insights and quality products to our passionate audience. If you're interested in sponsoring the Pause and Effect podcast, please get in touch. I look forward to partnering with you. Before we continue, let's address a critical aspect of pet care, gastric health. Introducing UltraPet's special diet gastric liquid care, formulated to aid pets during recovery from gastrointestinal issues. This versatile product boasts a balanced formulation with 31% protein, 9% fat, and 3% fiber, replenishing key nutrients essential for pets recovering from gastric issues. Featuring a delicious chicken flavor, it is highly palatable, encouraging pets to eat during recovery. I've had great success using this both with tube feeding and syringe feeding patients. What sets this liquid care apart is its comprehensive approach to pet health, with added prebiotics for digestive health and omega-3 and 6 for immune support. It is a holistic solution for upset stomachs. UltraPet's gastric liquid care comes in a 750-gram pack, providing an optimal solution for pets in need. Give it a try and witness the difference it makes to your pet's recovery. Your companions will thank you, and you'll appreciate UltraPet's dedication to pet health. Now let's return to our conversation. So let's start. What would your recommendation be for some of the more child or family friendly exotic pets to be able to start with, perhaps?
Certainly. Yeah, I think in the small mammal realm, I think rabbits are certainly a great place to start. I think they are, pretty hardy. They're definitely prey species, and so there can certainly be some concerns with them. And anytime they stress out or they have any sort of imbalance within their body, they can develop a syndrome called GI stasis syndrome, which is a clinical sign of a disease. It is not an actual disease, so you have to figure out what's underlying and causing that. But other than that, they're pretty low maintenance pets. You just provide them with hay, and they're kind of constant, ins and outs of hay is all they do. So they have, hay that they constantly munch down on, and then they actually are coprophagic, so they will eat their fecal material to get further digestibility of that hay material, and utilize all of those nutrients appropriately, and that's all they do. They're kind of like hay dispensers, and so they're really fun pets to have for kiddos. Certainly there can be concerns with handling with rabbits, and I know everyone's maybe heard of the story where your rabbit, kicks during handling or whatnot, and then they have a leg or a spinal fracture. Certainly that's a concern, but I think, if you go to a veterinarian or an animal care specialist immediately after obtaining the animal, or even have those discussions before with your veterinarian that you already have animals established care with, they can provide you with some advice to ensure that you don't have a negative experience with that animal. But I think rabbits are great. I think ferrets are another great option. I don't know. I know some countries around the world, ferrets are not as legal to own, but I don't know if South Africa is one of them.
No,
Can you own a ferret in South
I
Africa?
believe you can.
Excellent. Cool. So yeah, ferrets, they can be really great species as well. I describe them as slinky cats because that's really all they are. They're just a cat that is kind of a noodle, that is really an energetic member of the family. They are really good for keeping your kids entertained and vice versa. So they can be really great species to own. And then when you think about the reptile realm, I often advocate if you're going to start with a lizard or a snake, bearded dragons are my go-to lizard, and then ball pythons are my go-to snake. They are just really mellow species. With regard to husbandry, they are not as complicated as some of the other species that require a little bit more in the realm of specialized husbandry care, and they're really great species for teaching the basics of husbandry and exotic pet ownership. With regard to birds, it gets a little bit more complicated, but things like cockatiels and budgies are certainly good kind of smaller species to start with, some of our smaller cetaceans, before you graduate to something that's a little bit more complicated, like a cockatoo or a macaw, where they can have increased feather destructive behavior secondary to decreased stimulation within the home environment and a number of other concerns, but also remembering that those species live a little bit longer than a budgie or a cockatiel, so it's a more long-term option, and I typically reserve those species for folks who have done this for a while and are dedicated and know they really want to own a bird.
Absolutely. And so, obviously we speak about the length of life, their lifespan. I think from my experience, I agree in terms of having something small and manageable, particularly for young children. There's little hamsters and guinea pigs, and the little smallies that
Yeah.
they can handle and cuddle, and they're fluffy, and they maybe appeal, and then, like you said, for the boys and girls, but often
Hmm.
they want snakes, they want the reptiles. Those kind
Right.
of pets are wonderful. But with all of these, and cats and dogs, there are obviously concerns in terms of handling and some of the diseases that can
Hmm.
transmit between. How do you tackle sort of advising owners, both in terms of the feeding, but also in terms of the
Hmm.
handling?
Yeah, I think in terms of handling and realizing it's a great, opportunity to educate your children and the entire family about the importance of hand hygiene and the importance of not going out there and touching random animals in the wild because they can transmit diseases. And also, not only can they transmit to you, vice versa, right? So for a lot of our animal species, particularly things like primates, we can actually give them disease too. There have also been some, studies and recent literature out there, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic and all of that stuff. There have been some cases where we've been concerned about COVID-19 and coronaviruses being spread to some of our exotic pet species as well, and not only a zoological environment, but also an owned environment. So I typically tell people, especially if they're going to own reptiles and birds and those sort of things, practicing proper hand hygiene after handling and before handling is very, very important. And it should be a routine part of care of these species. Even if you have a rabbit or a guinea pig, it's good practice to just be like, okay, if you're going to handle this animal, we need to wash our hands before and after. Because things like, salmonella is kind of the classic one with some of our tiny turtles that little kids can, accidentally put in their mouth or, fit in places that they shouldn't be. So that can be certainly a concern. And having those conversations early on with our kiddos is going to be quite important. And I think it also is really helpful because it gives them a sense of ownership and it gives them a sense of pride in knowing that, they handle this snake and then they go wash their hands and they really feel proud that they've accomplished that task and they have protected not only themselves but the snake. So it gives them something to do as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, I like the fact that you make mention, I mean, that level of responsibility is important,
Hmm.
and it's a great
Hmm.
way of teaching them. I mean, I think,
Yes.
you can see the bond that children have when they feed the dog, not so much
Hmm.
the cats, because cats are just totally, cats never appreciate us,
Aloof
really.
in the corner. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the bond that children can gain with their
Hmm.
dogs, by feeding them and sort of interacting with them
Yep.
daily. So that level of responsibility and ownership, I think, is really important. One of the things that always concerns me is that in terms of exotic pets, their requirements, especially in terms of the husbandry, how they're kept,
Hmm.
are so feel complicated. Are there
Yeah.
good resources? How do owners or parents or children go about understanding the needs, the specific needs, say, let's say, of
Hmm.
rabbits? Because one of the things we see, for example, is a lot of fly strike. Obviously in a hot
Hmm.
country, flies, particularly in the summer, and owners are just
Yep.
totally unaware. So
Hmm.
perhaps just in terms of basic husbandry, the feeding practices of rabbits, they don't give hay. They're giving a lot of sort of pelleted food, or
Yep.
a lot of concentrate, a lot of
Yep.
treats,
Hmm.
and then we see the disease process like the teeth issues and the gut
Yep.
stasis and so on. So like how did you get informed? Is this a case of just being interested and finding the information? Where are the credible
Yeah.
places?
Yeah. I think it's really unfortunate in that, there are a lot of great resources out there, but there are also a lot of not so reliable resources out there. And it can be really hard for the general consumer, the general pet owner, to delve and kind of figure out which one's which. And I think that's really where the veterinarian's role comes into play, because certainly you can go to a pet store or go to a breeder, and they're going to have pretty good recommendations for you. But I can say that it just really varies quite widely on which individual you're dealing with. Some of them are really knowledgeable about these species and are going to have really fantastic advice to share with you. Others, maybe not so much. So trust your veterinarian. If you have one that sees exotic animals on the regular, go to them. Like I said, these exotic species should be taken to veterinarians as soon as they're acquired. They can oftentimes have parasitic disease, infectious disease, just from where they were bred or raised. You think about a shelter for dogs and cats, that's a breeding ground for infectious disease because it's a high concentration of animals with unknown backgrounds in a very, very small area. And that's very similar for a lot of these breeding operations. So getting them to a vet right away and realizing that they do need annual physical examinations, just like any other dog or cat, is going to be integral. And then in terms of websites and other resources that you can use, I typically advocate that folks go to kind of the organizations for reptile and amphibian veterinarians or exotic mammal veterinarians. There are a couple of really great sites. So Association of Exotic Mammal Vets, AEMV, and then ARAV is the Association of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians. And then there's also WAVMA, which is the World Aquatic Veterinary Medicine Association. So they may have some really great resources for owners as well that are just getting into the hobby. And if they don't have resources, oftentimes they'll have opportunities for you to type in your location or your area that you're in, and they'll give you some veterinarians that live in that area. Certainly that is kind of the US equivalent, so I'm not sure what options are available in South Africa, but I would anticipate there would be something sort of similar to that. And if you're at a loss, always reaching out to your local veterinary university is not a bad place to start, because oftentimes they will have graduates that are practicing in the area that have gone through university and have had interest in exotics, and those people will likely be great resources and can kind of connect you if needed to those individuals.
Absolutely. And I mean, the setup is so important. I think, historically, cats and dogs, maybe people are very familiar with, and they come into your house and they integrate into your house. And perhaps we do see behavioral issues and other knock-on effects as a result of people not setting up their lifestyle or their homes
Yep.
For those pets. But we see it even more in exotic pets, don't we?
Yes.
Like even not having adequate temperatures or setting up UV lights correctly, or like you said, even the handling of rabbits.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is even more critical with your exotic pets. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think part of the problem is that they're most of the time going to be a lot of prey species. So they tend to hide signs of illness until they are very, very sick. And so as a veterinarian, if it's not a wellness examination, we are oftentimes seeing an acute issue, an acute manifestation of a chronic disease that is likely secondary to husbandry in a lot of these cases. So really kind of the best treatment is prevention, right? If we can talk about these issues at the beginning and prevent this animal from going through an issue where, like you said with the rabbits, they may not be getting the proper diet. They then can't grind their teeth appropriately. Then they have abnormalities in their dental occlusion and then don't want to eat secondary to that. GI stasis syndrome in rabbits is a life-threatening condition that is an emergency. They need to be seen immediately. And, that is most of the time a very preventable thing. So certainly, like you said, husbandry, so incredibly important. I advocate oftentimes when I'm teaching students that your physical exam is really important, but what I really want you to do is get in that room and grill the owner a little bit on husbandry, right? You don't have to make them feel bad about anything, but just have a list of these common questions that you need to be asking. So when you go through, you can pick out areas where there might be improvement spots, right? Because there is no such thing as perfect husbandry. Doesn't exist. There are always areas where we can improve. And so I want to know where we can improve. Do not tell me that husbandry is good or bad. That is not a thing I want to hear. I want to hear what the spots are for us to get better. Because even myself, when I own exotic pets, I'm not perfect either. And I oftentimes have a third party come in and say, how does this look? Because from the outside looking in, it's a little different from you seeing your husbandry every day and thinking things look just dandy.
Absolutely. And you don't want to learn from mistakes. I mean, I take the example of being a snake owner and setting up what I thought was the most phenomenal cage. I did all my research and made sure the bedding was correct, water, heat pad, and so on and so forth, ventilation. And of course, when they're small, they are escape artists. And
Yeah.
so, you learn the hard way. And
You learn
that's also
quickly, don't you?
very quickly. Well, very quickly. Yeah. So, and I mean, we want to preserve every life. So, you don't want to
Yes.
go through the trauma, not only of having to deal with the repercussions, but also the heartache of your kids or yourself.
Right.
So,
Well, it's not a fair situation for anyone in those
no.
cases, right? Like, it's certainly not fair for the animals, but then to have that burden to bear on yourself where you were just trying to do a good thing, right? Like, you thought you were doing the right thing. I never fault owners for that, right? They are trying their very best, and sometimes they just don't have the resources available to hit all of those husbandry points you need. But again, that's the importance of having a veterinarian that is experienced in exotics and can provide you with that information to hopefully be the best you can with your exotic animal ownership.
Absolutely. And what would you say are the big no-nos? The err with caution, I do not advise, and just not yet, perhaps.
Species-wise,
Yeah.
yeah, so I think some of the more challenging mammals and reptiles and birds, honestly, reptiles tend to be the more challenging ones because their husbandry requirements can get a little bit much quite quickly. So things like chameleons. Chameleons are not really viable species as an exotic pet for most owners. They really require very specific humidity, feeding, round-the-clock care. Temperature needs to be pretty much smack on what they need. Otherwise, they're going to start to develop secondary conditions from that inadequate husbandry. And I think for most people that are not, reptile or herptile hobbyists that are just, wanting an exotic pet, they cannot provide the time nor resources to care for that particular species. And then things that are a little bit more dangerous, so like your monitor lizards, your tegus, those sort of animals where not only is there, husbandry concerns, but there are safety concerns with those animals too, right? So releasing them potentially out into the wild or them getting out can have serious repercussions for our native species. They're not really super fun to handle most of the time. They're not a, sweet cuddly pet. They're one that you kind of leave as an exhibit animal. And if that's what you want to do, certainly that's fine, but you have to understand the reality of that before you own that pet, because you get them and they're itty bitty and they look really cute. And then you have, a 4 or 5 foot monitor lizard that is no longer very cute, and you have to handle that animal. And then the obvious choice for no-nos is venomous, right? So any of our venomous species, nah, you shouldn't be doing that, I leave that up to the experts. I leave that up to the zoological institutions. There are very few reasons that I think a private owner should have a venomous species. And even those reasons, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if that's a good enough reason. It's just too high of a risk, and I don't know that it's worth it in the long term. Then when it comes to your mammal species, my big no-nos are primates. Primate ownership in the US is unfortunately quite high depending upon the region in which you live and the laws in that particular state. And primates are complex species. We are primates. We are complex species, as everyone knows. We have a lot going on in those brains, right? So if you get a monkey and you have that in your home, it's pretty much persistently like having, a toddler going through their terrible twos, right? And you can't talk to them. They can transmit diseases to you very easily. You can transmit diseases to them very easily. And I have found that it is a very rare occurrence unless you are in a zoological institution where you can provide them with an environment that meets all of their husbandry needs and is as enriching as they need it to be to not develop stereotypies and mental abnormalities and physical manifestations of inadequate husbandry and poor mental status. So those I don't typically advocate for as well. And then in the bird realm, obviously macaws are great and they're really, really pretty, but you got to know what you're doing to own a macaw, and you need to have enough space and enough experience behind you to not be afraid of that animal, because some of them can be really nice, but others can be, not so used to handling. And in a bird with that giant psittaciform beak where, they can crush fingers and really, do some damage, you want to be careful with those species as well.
Absolutely. And then let's talk about the lifespan. Obviously, particularly with children, they're going to probably grow out of it quite quickly.
Yep.
As much as my son is like, no, I'm always going to want my axolotls. We know
Yeah.
realistically that sometimes these are things that they either move on and to get other interests, or they
Hmm.
move out of the home, and then you're
Yeah.
stuck with them. So, you made mention of some of these birds are with people for, and some of the species that you advise against live
Hmm.
or can outlive you.
Yeah. Macaws can be up to, with great husbandry, they can be in the 70s or 80s. Like they can be
Incredible.
very old birds. And so being experienced and knowing what you're getting into on the front end and being ready for what my next steps are, right? What are my contingency plans for, what if I don't like this bird, right? What if this bird is not a good fit for my family? What am I going to do with that animal next, right? That should be a question that you ask yourself, because certainly you want to be prepared at the front end, and hopefully you won't have to think about what to do with this animal in the event that it doesn't work out. But realistically, sometimes that happens, and it can be very difficult to rehome a large parrot like that. So only getting into it when you're ready, super important. Reptiles, like we talked about, they can certainly outlive you, right? So some of our larger tortoise species, people love to get things like African spurred or sulcata tortoises. Those guys can live a really, really long time. Some of our Galapagos tortoises or Aldabra tortoises can be up in the hundreds. So it's not it's not a short-term issue, and I think that's one of the problems with exotic pet ownership is that people are fortunately or unfortunately very used to dogs and cats, right? And dogs and cats do have a finite lifespan, and it's sad because they've got a lot of love in those little bodies, but they just don't tend to last as long as we would like them to. And so you hit the tens and you start to be thinking, okay, we're getting a little bit up there in age. And that is just not the case for a lot of these small, reptile species or large exotic species. So that's a paradigm shift for people that are getting into exotic pet ownership that they need to figure out on the front end, because I see far too many of these animals that are abandoned into the wild, unfortunately, or abandoned at a shelter. And it's really hard to either, number one, find them another owner, or number two, have the situation where we've now had an animal out in the wild, fending for itself, trying to just survive, and it's at a detriment to our native populations. And now what do we do with that animal, right? It comes to us or it comes to animal control. And that's not a really fair situation for that animal to be in either, right? Like it now is a situation where either we rehome it quite rapidly or we have to think about a humane euthanasia situation. And that's not a situation that I ever want an animal in as a consequence of poor planning on an owner's part.
Absolutely. And do you deal with that? Do you deal with humane euthanasias, or is that something that you have to tackle within your job?
Yeah, it's not super common for me to have to deal with it for, animals that were released out into the wild. That's normally a national and state sort of thing where the state veterinarians will deal with that if they find an invasive species within the environment. But certainly one of the worst and also honestly one of the greatest gifts we have in this profession is humane euthanasia, right? It's one of the worst parts of our job, but we also can let these animals go peacefully and painlessly when the time comes where their quality of life is just simply not where we'd like it to be anymore. And you can sense that there might be some level of suffering. So I do humane euthanasia on all of these species routinely. And like I said, it's unfortunate because a lot of these species come to us with really, really significant disease because they hide signs of illness until late in the disease process. So oftentimes there's not very much we can do other than provide, palliative care for these animals or offer humane euthanasia. There are certainly some really great instances, and I mean, daily, I love to save lives. It's my favorite part of the job, and we love getting animals on the straight and narrow and feeling better. But I also am not a person who is afraid of humane euthanasia either. I think it's a really great option for these species where we don't have another option, and the owners really are, stressed out about their animal's condition. And I never want to be the last one to bring that up because oftentimes in the room, it's kind of a taboo subject, right? Owners may be thinking, it might be time, but until you bring it up, oftentimes they're not going to want to mention it because they don't want to seem like they don't care or they're bad owners. And that's just
Of
simply
course.
not the case.
Absolutely. And like you've made mention of, they often hide a lot of their discomfort. And so
Hmm.
sometimes owners are not even aware. So having those
Hmm.
regular vet visits must be really important for you to be able to, discuss things that perhaps no one's asking the questions of at home.
Yeah, and
How they're
talking
doing.
about some of the subtle signs, right, in these species that, you wouldn't expect to see in a dog or cat, but that you can pick up very very easily in these animals if you're watching close enough. And oftentimes these owners will come to me and they'll say, my rabbit hasn't eaten in 22 minutes. And I'm like, okay, that's amazing, right? Like, you are on it. They're like, I offered it its favorite lettuce, it didn't want it, and its fecal consistency is a little bit different. And like, to some veterinarians, they'd be like, okay, crazy person, go back home. Like, we'll see if the animal actually has a problem. But that is a very real concern for our exotic species. These minute changes that you see are often manifestations and indicative of a larger disease process underlying. So I would advocate for any veterinarians out there that may be listening to this, if an owner comes to you with an exotic pet and has a concern, see that pet, okay? Don't brush them off. It is most likely going to be something significant going on that you can potentially treat or work up and find an issue, because these owners know their pets a lot better than we do. So even though you think we're the experts on these animals, they are the experts on that particular animal. We know the species, they know that individual, right? So that's something I like to advocate to owners and veterinarians as well.
Oh, that's great. And I totally agree. I have so many questions for you, and I hope that we can tap into your knowledge at some point and discuss maybe individual species. I know people are calling out for more information on rabbits and birds and snakes. So I'm so grateful for your time today, and thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to definitely call you back when you get a gap at some point, so that we can discuss some particular disease processes. I think just the information that you're providing us is phenomenal, both for me as a GP cat and dog vet, but also for the listeners who have an interest in exotic pets and just want to provide the best kind of care and the best kind of environment for their pets to keep them healthy and with them for as long as possible. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. I appreciate you giving us the platform to talk about this, because, it is kind of a subject that not many people, talk about in the public space. So it's really nice to get some love for our exotic pets as well. I really appreciate it.
And I would urge anybody to check out your Instagram page. It's heartwarming. I cannot believe what you get to experience. So please keep posting and educating us. It's really, really interesting, really informative. So
certainly,
much appreciated.
Yes, will do. My pleasure. Yeah, please call me back. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to do that. Have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the rest of your on-call. I hope it's manageable. And it was
Thank you very much.
Great today. Keep well.
Have a lovely day. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's it for today's episode on exotic pets for families. I hope our conversation with Dr. Christian has provided you with a deeper understanding of what it takes to care for these unique companions. Owning an exotic pet can be incredibly rewarding, but it also comes with specific challenges. By being informed and prepared, you can ensure that both you and your pet have a happy, healthy relationship. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with other potential exotic pet owners. Follow us on social media for more tips and insights into the world of pet care. This is Dr. Carra, reminding you to always consider the well-being of all your pets, whether they're furry, feathered, or scaled. Lastly, please don't forget to give your pets a big hug from me. Welcome back to Just for Pets. You're with Dr. Carra.
Hello, Doctor. It's Chanel the Persian. And, I can't seem to stop retching to get this hairball up.
Are you on a special diet?
Excuse me?
Hairball control food will really help. And maybe some Laxapet. And lucky for you, Just for Pets have a big range.
Well, how early can I get some?
Order today and we'll deliver pronto.
Wow, I feel better already.
Justforpets.co.za. Vet approved, pet adored. Get it all to your door.